Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. And thank you especially to the patrons who make this possible for you every single day with their support at patreon.com/SW7x7. So we were going to talk about the New Republic on this episode. We were going to do it as a deep dive episode related to the Path of Hate. That was the Morgan Elspeth episode. But, you know, I rather would jump into the Barriss Offee episode. So we're going to do that today. So we'll talk about the New Republic at a different point in time. For now, we're going to talk about Devoted, which is the first of the 3 Barriss Offee episodes in Tales of the Empire. This is our modified 7 takeaway breakdown. We'll start with our first takeaway, which is when it takes place, which is basically during the events of Revenge of the Sith and immediately thereafter, because Barriss Offee is in a prison cell and we see her looking out at fires at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. So yeah, it's a pretty dramatic situation, and there are a couple of shock troopers, as they're described in the audio description, who say that Barriss better consider herself lucky that she's no longer a Jedi because they're not going to exist after tomorrow. Now, I know Barriss went off on the Jedi and said that she thinks that they're the villains. At least that's what she was doing at the end of Season 5's Clone Wars story arc. But I don't think she expected things to end this way and probably wasn't wanting it to go that way either. Now, as for our second takeaway, Barriss herself, the last time we saw her, she had confessed to her crimes in the bombing of the Jedi Temple, as I said at the end of Season 5 of the Clone Wars, and that was the last that we'd seen of Barriss in canon storytelling. So we find out in this episode that she received a life sentence for her crime. And I figure that's probably worth mentioning because when she is presented by the fourth sister with an opportunity to do something different, kind of makes sense that she would at least take the opportunity as presented to her, or at least find out what's going to happen, because otherwise she's either going to rot in a cell or they're just going to kill her right there in the cell. For a third takeaway, we find out that Barriss is initially taken to the Inquisitorious Fortress on Nur. That's that ocean planet that we've seen in Jedi Fallen Order and in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, just to name a couple of things. And speaking of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, that is the scythe that we see in the Kenobi series that the 4th Inquisitor and Barriss are riding to Nur. It's named in the audio description. And when we get to the Fortress Inquisitorius, we see that it is still under construction. This is happening either during or immediately after the events of Revenge of the Sith. And this place is actually significantly built, but there are still towers under construction. But the fact that it is as far along as it is tells you more about Emperor Palpatine and how he has plans within plans within plans within plans all going on, and he's been having this fortress constructed probably for, more than a year, probably for at least the duration of the Clone Wars. For a fourth takeaway, we'll just talk briefly about the first of the 2 tests that Barriss is presented with. It's a showdown with the Grand Inquisitor, who doesn't need a lightsaber to handle Barriss, but basically says, hey, I'm going to help you unlock your power potential because the Jedi trained you and it limited what you were capable of. And so they have a bit of a confrontation, and the Grand Inquisitor obviously has no problem handling himself with her. It isn't until Barriss starts to tap into the dark side of the Force that she is able to start holding her own with the Grand Inquisitor. And that's a fact which, of course, the Grand Inquisitor is quite pleased about. For a fifth takeaway, we'll talk about the other test, which is one of those kinds of tests where it's like, we only got room for one of you, and so you're going to have to fight to the death. And it's a double elimination kind of situation, I guess, because there's a ray shield that is very painful closing in on them, and a pit in the middle of this fighting place, and we have Barriss Offee against this other Jedi, Dante, presumably another Jedi, because she's like, hey Dante. But this is the first time that we've ever met Dante, and Dante, while Barriss was being tested by the Grand Inquisitor, Dante was being tested by the Fourth Sister, and ultimately brought into this one-on-one confrontation. Barriss tries to say, hey Dante, we don't have to do this, they're not going to kill the both of us, even though the Grand Inquisitor said, yeah, if you don't fight each other, you both die. So we know that's going to happen. Dante knows this is going to happen, and he attacks. So at least maybe this establishes for us a little bit of sympathy at some level for Barriss, maybe. Dante just says that he's going with the new situation, but yeah, not hard enough apparently, because Barriss gives herself over to the dark side and force chokes Dante, and that is the end of that. For a sixth takeaway, we'll talk about Barriss's induction ceremony into the Inquisitorius, which is notable for a couple of reasons. First of all, two of the attendees, in addition to Barriss and the Fourth Sister, one of them is the Inquisitor that we see in the Tales of the Jedi episode featuring Ahsoka, the one that sort of conflicts with the Ahsoka novel, the Inquisitor who shows up on that planet where Ahsoka's been hiding, and the one that Ahsoka eventually kills. So yeah, that Inquisitor is not long for this galaxy. And the other Inquisitor who's there is Marok, and Marok is the character we see in the Ahsoka series. That's the one who gets killed on Cetos and goes out in a burst of green mist. And that's Ahsoka's doing as well, so nearly 3 decades later. But of course, the big reveal is when the Inquisitors get to meet their new master, who is none other than Darth Vader. And there's a moment where Barriss is looking at Vader, and Vader is looking at Barriss, and you gotta ask yourself, do they know? I mean, certainly Anakin recognizes Barriss, but does Barriss recognize Anakin in the Force in any way, shape, or form? It does not seem like that's the case. Like, she doesn't have any sort of startled reaction, say the same way Ahsoka did in Rebels, for example. And there's also no mention in the audio description of her having any sort of dawning awareness or anything like that. So yeah, she's just seeing whoever this crazy Darth Vader person is and thinking, all right, yeah, I guess he is my master now, and puts on her helmet and says, "Long live the Empire." Doesn't exactly sound devoted, but kind of starting down that path. And for seventh and final takeaway, we'll do our fun fact situation here. First off, Jason Isaacs is back to voice the Grand Inquisitor, which he does in Star Wars animation. It's not Rupert Friend, who did the Grand Inquisitor in live action for the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. But yeah, wonderful to see Jason Isaacs back in the fold. Also, Raya Kilstedt returns to provide the voice of the Fourth Sister. Raya first portrayed that character in live action in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. And of course, D. Bradley Baker is here to do clone voice work as well. So always very cool. And so that's what I've got for you about Devoted, which is the first of the 3 Barriss Offee episodes in Tales of the Empire. That is going to do it for this episode of the show. If you enjoy this daily dose of Star Wars joy, please help me get it out to more people who might enjoy it. You can do that with ratings and reviews if you haven't done that already. You can simply tell people, whether in person or online, and you can even tell algorithms by subscribing and liking and following and joining and commenting wherever you catch episodes of the show. If there are comment sections, all of that helps. And you can even help me create and produce this daily dose of Star Wars joy, and you can learn more about that at patreon.com/SW7X7. Every little bit helps. And it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode, as always. And may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.